Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris Blue Raven, and I'm here with my special guest, Mark Leslie. And Mark, if you want to present your last name, I know I'll butcher it.
Lefebvre.
Lefebvre. Okay. All right. Very, very nice name.
Is it any wonder why I write under the name Mark Leslie?
Obviously you're French.
Yeah, that is French.
Okay.
Lots of extra consonants that thrown in just for good measure.
It's very, very pretty. It's a pretty name. Yeah, and I like what you were talking about, and it does make perfect sense about the spirits and different objects containing different vibrations of different ghosts that might not get along. And what about mirrors? You know, mirrors are said to be haunted as well, and they tend to have a certain frequency and signature which actually captures energy. What's your impression of that?
Well, I mean, mirrors themselves are amazing because how else can you see yourself? I mean, you know, especially when you go back before the technology of the selfie and the being able to see yourself on a webcam presentation of yourself on a computer screen. But mirrors allowed you to see something you could never see before. Mm-hmm. Mirrors also, and I mean, it takes you right back to Alice in Wonderland. It almost seems to be, and even designers have used mirrors in designing buildings to give the impression that there is more space there. Mm-hmm. So you always wonder, you know, is that a reflection of the room or is that its own space? So mirrors themselves are mystical and magical. Even just the science of them I find fascinating. Mm-hmm. So why couldn't a mirror capture something and see something that we can't normally see?
Mm-hmm. I agree with that also, especially antique mirrors. They seem to have a different kind of energetic, and you know, some people are superstitious with those. But yeah, anything that's old, I would suspect would have the original signature of the person who owned it.
And that was actually funny. So the story Requiem was born out of, I was working at a bookstore in Ottawa, and we were sharing ghost stories one afternoon, one quiet afternoon in the bookstore, as often happens when people start talking about spooky stuff, and somebody was sharing a ghost story about a Victorian mirror that the people saw a young girl in a blue dress combing her hair in front of the mirror, and she kept combing her hair as if she was never satisfied that her hair was pretty enough. And that was the impression that people continually saw every time they saw that mirror. And that's what sparked the idea. I said, well, maybe the mirror is what allows him to finally see the ghosts, because he won't see them in the room. But if he looks in the mirror, maybe he'll see her plus all the other ghosts in the room.
Very interesting. Yeah.
So that's where a real life ghost story that was shared with me became a fiction story, because I had a lot of fun exploring it.
Yeah, what a writer you are. That's awesome. Yeah, you have a really nice, I wouldn't say it's an imagination, but you're very in tune with a lot of different things, without a doubt.
Well, I like to pay attention to a lot of things. I like to think I have an open mind, and I like to take in ideas from conversations that I have with people, and just see what I can do with it.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And have you ever attended a seance in Sudbury or anywhere else?
I have not attended a seance as an adult. I have, of course, done Ouija boards with friends, and I've had a few odd experiences with an Ouija board where a friend of mine ended up, who never got nosebleeds, suddenly for no reason got these significant nosebleeds when we had started to do a seance, and that just kind of freaked us out enough to stop. And of course we've done the seance thing where, you're getting a little bit spooked by what's being said, and so everyone immediately withdraws their hands from the board because they just don't want to do it anymore. So, but I've never attended a seance. Have you?
Actually, I've conducted one before. Yeah.
Ooh.
It was very, very interesting. Yeah, we brought in Nostradamus.
Oh,
believe it or not,
really?
it's a long story. I won't tell you on air,
wow.
but
Wow.
I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Yeah, this was a couple years ago, actually. Very, very interesting. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. See, I mean, imagine the thing I think is intriguing about that is the ability to channel. And in many ways, a simple way of thinking of a seance is, being able to tune in a radio signal and pick it up and adjust it enough that you can actually turn the noise into something that you can understand.
Exactly. Very well said. Yeah, and we are, like I said, we're multidimensional beings, and I just believe people don't use their abilities. They kind of tune them out for whatever reason. Maybe it's fear, or other times maybe they're just not aware they have that skill. But it's still, it's definitely there without a doubt.
Yeah, and it's almost something that's probably in all of our minds, and we have the ability, but we teach ourselves to lose it. Kind of like children lose their imagination as they get older too, right?
Yeah, it's
Um,
programming.
my son, 9 years old, doesn't need more than a stick that suddenly becomes a plane in his mind as he's flying it around the room. And that as we get older, we seem to have lost our ability to just imagine and just
Hmm.
enjoy the power that we have inherently in our minds.
Hmm.
And so I find that that's always a fascinating thing that I think, yeah, I grew up and they beat the creativity out of me.
Well, it's programming and conditioning, I think, on a lot of different levels. But you're so right. I think the simplicity of life and tuning into nature and elements and just being one with a lot of different, with nature itself, I think really cues us to who we really are. But, at least he doesn't have an iPhone, right? Or does he?
Not yet. He plays with mine, but he does
Uh-oh.
practical things for me.
Well, that's great. Yeah. Well, nowadays kids are getting so conditioned with technology that, they lose touch with that. But yeah, in the old days it was a lot easier. But it's fascinating nonetheless. And like I said, I love the way you write and the way you present your information. And it does, it puts the mind in motion to other areas that we normally don't think about. So I think that's really nice.
Well, that's good. Thank you. That's, I mean,
Yeah.
one of the reasons that I write is, I think I was born with the innate desire to tell stories, and if it had been a long time ago, I would have been the guy standing around the campfire wanting to share stories with the
Hmm.
other people
Yeah.
there. And so I get to do that mostly through the written words. But when I have a chance to chat about it, it's always a lot of fun as well.
Yeah. How cool is that? Are you still there? You almost sound like you dropped off for a second.
Oh, sorry. I've got my mic, my
Okay,
cough button here. So
that's all right. I just want to make sure you were still there. That's really interesting. And what was the most mysterious area you ever investigated in Sudbury that really sparked your interest?
I think the mine did it for me. I think it's really it's difficult because there's so many fascinating stories. I think I mean we talked about the mine. There's a really intriguing story about and actually it is a dead miner, and it's the story of the woman who moves into a house and keeps thinking that she smells smoke, and she keeps thinking that there's somebody standing outside on her front step. And she's moved in to a house that she's purchased, and she realizes that she purchased the house from the woman who lives next door, and it was her son who lived in that house beside her, and he died in the mine, and the old the old woman next door stands at the window and looks out the window and looks at the ghost of her son who used to go outside to smoke on the front step when he was alive.
Hmm.
And again, and it's this beautifully touching moment where it's a little bit eerie, but it's also very, very touching that she, when he was alive, she used to look out the window and just be satisfied. There's my son. He's a grown man. I'm proud of him, and he's just having a smoke on the front step, and he's just like looking out at the night sky. And that after he passed away, she continues to look out her window and see him on the front step. And you wonder, is that his spirit that the woman who lives in the house now can sense
Hmm.
the smell of smoke, seeing that it looks like there's somebody standing on her front step, or is that the mother who is causing that?
Right.
Because she so desires to want to see her son. And that's sort of similar to when I was talking about uh, um, Alma, who wanted so badly for somebody to see the home, the beautiful mansion, the way she remembered it.
Hmm. Right.
And is it a spirit, or is it the woman who's causing that vision and that scent to be in the air because she
Right.
so desires it?
Yeah, and in the psychic bonding also with like a mother and a son, that would make sense if he departed, that she would have an etheric connection to him on some level and be pulling
Definitely.
that psychic energy in. So perhaps she's seeing it through her psychic energy, Who
Yeah.
knows? It's fascinating. It's really complex.
And I love that because the reality is we don't really know for sure, and the speculation of that makes us think, and it makes us wonder, and it makes us marvel at the world around us, which
Hmm.
is, I guess, a great state to be in.
Right. There was a story with my grandmother who apparently was warned by a spirit that there was a gas leak in the house. And my grandmother was a natural clairvoyant, but she saw this old lady, I guess, at the end of her bed every night. And she couldn't figure out why this woman was there, this apparition. And finally, the apparition got right up in her face one night. And she got so startled, but she realized that there was a gas leak and actually that was warning her to get out of the house.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
So
So,
this
yeah.
is just basically, I'm gonna scare you out of this house if
Yeah, it
I
was really
just to
interesting. My
save your
mother
life.
told me that story, and it was like, wow. So that's just an
Wow.
example of how spirits can warn us of things that are not necessarily positive.
And there are, and I didn't have any of these stories for the books, but I have heard lots of stories where, um, it potentially a relative comes back to warn you about not going on a trip or
Mm-hmm.
to tell you about something, which I've always found quite fascinating. Is that, and you talked about, in touch with your ancestors and stuff like that. And it makes you wonder, do we think of time as a one-dimensional, forward backward thing, or is time something that can be transcended as well?
Exactly. And to me, time is just a benchmark of measure. So there really isn't time. I tend to work out of time and the illusion of time. I'm just different anyway. But yeah, I think people are programmed by time itself. And in fact, I think we should be moving in consciousness, and that's where we can receive more data. That's my personal experience with it. But yeah,
Fascinating.
it really is. And so far as creepy stories go, I mean, what is the most creepy experience you have encountered with your research?
I think it was in Haunted Hamilton. There's the chapter called the Tombstone Ghost, and the title actually almost gives away the shock ending. Um, but the story took place. It started in Hamilton in the 70s, and there was a man who woke up, heard his wife scream beside him in bed. He opened his eyes and he sees this ghost hovering above their bed, and it's like this woman with this haggard look, frizzy hair, black spaces for eyes. You can't actually see her eyes, and it's her upper torso. She doesn't seem to have a lower torso.
Hmm.
And the woman, his wife, woke to see her floating above the bed, screamed, of course, woke him up. He opened his eyes, saw her, and then she disappeared.
Hmm.
And they continued to see that apparition floating above their beds in the middle of the night. And they ended up bringing in some psychic researchers and a reporter from the Hamilton Spectator. And I was researching from the articles that were written in the 70s about this ghost. And they did some history and some studies, and the psychic that came in basically said, they believed certain, there's like a couple, like sort of the letters for her name, the abbreviation for her name,
Mm-hmm.
and there was um, the belief that there was something about flowers, and there was an impression about um, um, SA, I think were the initials. And there was all this, but they couldn't figure out what it was. They just reported all these things, and then um, they ended up moving away after about a year and a half. They moved out of this apartment, and about 10 years later, that building was torn down. And when the building was torn down, they found in the wall of the bedroom there were remnants of two pieces of tombstone
Hmm.
that were in the wall, and they learned that the woman who had lived in the house, who was in a wheelchair, didn't have legs, which sort of explained why the ghost didn't have legs.
Mm-hmm.
They sort of had the same sort of look. Had lost two of her children, and the tombstones were that of her children, that somehow had gotten incorporated into the building. And sometimes builders use just raw materials that are dug up from the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and that she was trying to let them know that her children were at were unrest because their tombstones had been disturbed,
Wow.
and her last name was Flowers, and there was all these different pieces that they. They only put together 10 years after the investigation. And there was this really eerie picture of him standing there holding a piece of one of the tombstones in the rubble on the spot where 10 years ago they had done this major investigation. And there was a picture or an artist rendition of the woman that was seen hovering above their beds. And it was not meant to be a spooky story. It was meant to be a touching story.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember, and this was in a previous house that we lived in when I was working on it. I was in the basement of my den. It was about 2:30 in the morning. My son was asleep. My wife was asleep upstairs. And all I had was the light, actually the same lamp that I have on now. And I'm in the den, and I just finished the chapter, and I just stretching, and I go, okay, I'm going to call it a night. I'm going to go to bed. And I realized I was in the only pool of light in the entire house, and I kept seeing her haunting eyes, or the dark sockets of her eyes staring at me.
Mm.
And I looked out beyond the room I was in at the pitch darkness of the rest of the house, and I realized I couldn't get up. I was so frightened that I might see something like that I stayed there for 20 minutes shaking
Wow.
before I finally got up the nerve to go or turn on all the lights in the house so I can make my way up to the bedroom and go to bed. And I do that to myself quite regularly when I'm working, because I tend to, because I work full time, I tend to do a lot of my writing early in the morning or late at night after my family's asleep, and I end up doing that to myself where I'm so freaked out, I'm so so into the story that I'm writing that I'm a little trepidatious about what's going on around me.
Wow, that is so funny. And I guess, do you dream a lot?
Yeah, I do.
You do. Is it vivid with spirits or ghosts or?
Fortunately, my dreams are not nightmares.
That's good.
Fortunately, for the most part, with the exception of there's a lot of dreams that I have that are a little bit creepy involve wandering through a big home or a mansion where I'm trying to turn the lights on in front of me, and someone's coming along behind me turning the lights off behind me.
Hmm.
And so those tend to be the ones that freak me out the most.
Yeah, that's kind of creepy. You have a shadow stalker.
It's like it's like, yeah, I want to keep the lights on, and someone's trying to turn them off. Like, that could be ominous.
Oh no, you're haunted in your dreams. No, I'm teasing
Maybe that's
you.
just my deadline for my next book creeping up
Yeah,
on me.
there you go. That could be it also. It's interesting. What's your impression of the old hag?
Oh, the old hag. Yeah.
Mm.
Fascinating. Was one of the first stories I remember reading when I was like 12 that just kept me awake at night for days on end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I believe so, and it's kind of covered in the Spooky Sudbury chapter a little bit when you talk about, and I've done a lot of sleep research, research on sleep and the physiological things that happen to your body. So one of the things that happens when you go to sleep is your body produces, let's say, a chemical reaction that actually paralyzes you, so that while you are dreaming, you don't hurt yourself. While your mind is working through the things that it has to work through while you're dreaming in REM sleep, your body is actually completely paralyzed. And so one of the theories about the old hag, and for listeners who may not be familiar with it, is you wake up and you open your eyes and you can't move, you're paralyzed, and the old hag is pressing down on your chest. And sometimes you see her looking down at you, holding you down before you suddenly escape it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like 30 seconds to a full minute where you can't move, and she's got you. And that's a common thing. Sometimes it's the old hag people see. Sometimes they wake up and it's an angel or a demon standing beside the bed looking down on them. Sometimes it's an alien. And the concept is that you have woken up, but your body is still producing that paralysis, and that potentially that's what causes the feeling of the old hag, because it's primarily an East Coast legend.
Hmm.
I have epilepsy, and one of the most terrifying things that ever happened to me um, was when I think it was about 14 years old. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and feeling that sort of, oh my God, I'm paralyzed, I can't move.
Mm.
And it almost felt like someone was holding me down into the bed. And I called out for help. And I was actually having a seizure at the time. And I ended up falling out of the bed, hitting my head um, on the night table, and
Mm-hmm.
actually going into a coma
Oh my
for about
goodness.
45 minutes. And so the local police department, our fire department came, because small town in northern Ontario would take an hour for an ambulance to go from Sudbury to my small town.
Mm-hmm.
So the fire department was there. They helped me. I have no recollection of apparently getting up and talking and whatever afterwards, but I still remember probably one of the most terrifying things that had happened to me in the middle of the night was waking up with that sensation that reminded me very much of that feeling of you wake up and you've got that sleep paralysis thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went to the extreme where I was actually continually paralyzed because I was in a seizure. And
Wow.
I'm not sure if because I'd only ever had those seizures when I was sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't sure if it was, the seizure was caused by that sort of same paralysis that happens,
Mm-hmm.
or where it came from. But it was only something that ever happened when I was sleeping, and then they went away. And that was around, I think, sleep terrors or something that I was always fascinated with.
Right. Yeah.
When my son was at that age where he would wake up inexplicably screaming for no reason, not that he had a bad dream, he would just wake up screaming.
Mm-hmm.
I was always fascinated by the concept of sleep terrors and where they came from.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like what I call boogies, lower astral entities or disembodied spirits. I was going to ask you, do you guys, when they have those issues, do you bless the house or do you do something to clear that negative energy? Because that's my take anyway.
No, I've never done that actually. I've usually just just lay in bed with my son
That's
and
why you
tell
write
him.
horror.
Yeah, I
Well, that's
usually
interesting.
hide from the boogeyman with him.
Right.
That's usually what happens.
Wow. Yeah, I was just going to say, if you want to clear that energy, there's ways to do that. But some people, can deal with it in different ways. But all very interesting. So you say you don't have the epilepsy anymore?
No, when I passed puberty, it went away,
Oh, that's good to hear.
which yeah, and I'm very, very, very fortunate that I can live a normal life, and have a driver's license and the whole bit. But that was something that had happened, and it was terrifying, like the whole concept. But I always equate, when I think about the old hag, I
Hmm.
can't help think about that, like waking up and being completely paralyzed and not being able to do anything.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, I've always, I don't know if you've seen The Serpent and the Rainbow, the
Oh,
movie.
yeah, that was a great
The
movie.
the being buried alive thing.
And that's based on a true story.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I actually met the author when he was in Hamilton a few years ago, and I got a copy of that book signed,
Cool.
and it was just terrifying. Wade Davis, a scientist, who was actually
Oh, nice.
the author. But yeah, fascinating concept of being buried alive, which is
Hmm.
kind of, I think that the stories of the old hag sort of draw upon that.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. It's interesting, too. Speaking of buried alive, I mean, there are tales of people being buried alive back in the old days when they thought they were dead and they weren't, and then they'd bury them, and that would make, a lot of different tales with that. But yeah,
Yeah,
people waking up and realizing that they're, being buried alive.
yeah. That just is a frightening thing.
Hmm. Well, wasn't it they used to take a mirror to see if they would exhale or breathe, and that's how they used to check to see if they were actually really dead?
Yeah, they'd hold a mirror, and yeah,
Yeah.
up to them.
Well, that's another story in its own, isn't it?
Well, what if the spirit got onto the mirror?
There you go. You never know. And what about sleepwalking? I guess you haven't done any of that.
No, but my son does.
Oh, he does. Ooh,
My son sleepwalks,
wow.
which is kind of eerie. Like, sometimes he'll wake up in the basement on the couch,
Oh my goodness.
and in this case, it's a little bit eerie. I mean, but he's a very active boy, so I can't see, like, even when he's asleep, he can maintain that activity. I've always been fascinated. So when I was I used to work at a lodge in Northern Ontario with a couple of buddies of mine. We were in high school. We were about 17 years old, and we would go up for the weekends and we would work and we would chop wood and work in the maple syrup bush and things like that. And so, being teenagers, we'd stay up talking until like too late into the night. And I remember JP was on the bunk bed below me, and I was in the top bunk bed, and I was the big chicken who was always afraid, and I would hear things in the night, and I would, hear the call of a loon over the lake, and I would think it was some spirit trying to come get me. And JP used to have nightmares, and he would talk in his sleep. And there were times when I would wake up and he was having a conversation with somebody in the room in his sleep, and it was freaking me out. And there were times when he had kicked and attacked me, like kicking the top bunk, thinking because he was dreaming that I was trying to compress him in a garbage compactor.
Oh, wow.
And there were these. It was constantly where I would have these long conversations with him in the middle of the night, and I never realized that he was asleep the whole time.
Oh, my goodness.
And he had told me all kinds of stories. And he goes, I never told you that story. I said, no, you told me last night. He goes, no, I was sleeping last night. He's like, no, you were awake for an hour and you were telling me the story. And so
someone did.
It was intriguing.
That's interesting. Do you ever record that?
What's that?
Did you ever use a tape recorder to record the conversation?
No, I never did. Although I did begin, sort of got about 3/4 of a novel finished based on that experience with JP and the night terrors that he had. Because the concept was then, well, what if he was bringing something from another world into our world through the power of his dreams?
Right.
And so that was one of those yet unfinished projects, of which I have about 15 or 20.
Awesome. Yeah, it's almost like he's a medium bringing in whatever entity it was, but it makes you wonder if you're really talking to the person, the personality, or if you're talking to some kind of a walk-in that's taking them over when they rest at night.
Oh, that just gave me a chill.
Oh, yeah. Spooking you out, am I? Oh, good.
You certainly are.
Well, it is Ravenstar's witching hour,
Yes.
And insofar as the people of the townspeople of Sudbury, are they used to paranormal activity? Are they superstitious?
You know what? Both Sudbury and Hamilton are blue-collar towns. Mm-hmm. So, they are pragmatic, mostly very practical. Now, interestingly enough, when I have done the book signings in Hamilton and in Sudbury, there are no shortage of people who will approach me and, say, oh, started to read the book. It's really, really good. Can you sign it? And then after, you break the ice for a minute chatting with them about, the weather or whatever, then they kind of lean in and they say, I actually had this weird thing happen. And they share a ghost story, or they share something bizarre that happened to them, or lights they saw in the sky. So I think on the surface, particularly, you look at it and you say, yeah, Sudbury's a very pragmatic town and everyone's, straight, logical, and if it's not scientifically proven, then they're not going to give it any time. But then when you get to talk to people, you realize that there's a lot more elements to what people believe than they may first be willing to share.
Right. Yeah. Well, especially if they're kind of scoffed at if they tell ghost tales or experiences, And then once it becomes more acceptable, it seems like people are more comfortable exposing that information. But, right now we have so many, mainstream is really saturated with paranormal shows. And it seems to me like there's a lot of buzz insofar as that goes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see that. It's funny. People approach me with two different perspectives. They go, "Oh, you write that stuff," and then they kind of turn the other way and say, "Well, it's not literature," and they walk off and hold their head up high and away from me. And then there are others who, the first instinct is to say, "I've got a ghost story to tell you," and that's always, it's really, really interesting because I. Just from an afternoon spent at a bookstore doing a book signing, I probably can write 3 chapters worth of material based on the stuff that people share with me.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah, that's great when they come forward.
Yeah, it's I almost have enough for Haunted Hamilton too.
Oh, Oh, you should do that.
which is exciting. Yeah, I mean the challenge is because I usually do fiction projects. I have the one nonfiction book a year. So Hamilton was 2012,
Hmm.
Sudbury 2013. This year, the haunted bookstores and libraries, and then I'm kind of debating. There's three potential ones I can do for next year, and that's the challenge. There's so many great ideas and so little time.
Oh, wow. So you do one book a year, but that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm trying to do one nonfiction paranormal book per
Excellent.
year, and then I have a novel coming out, I Death, this year, and there's two other novels I want to get out, but I'm trying not to cram them all into the same time period.
Excellent.
It's
Wow.
just, yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, you're a busy man. I bet you spend, a lot of time writing.
I do. I try to spend more time writing instead of goofing around on Facebook and Twitter and
Mm.
social
Yes.
media,
Welcome to my world.
the great distractions. But no, I love writing. I love storytelling. I love doing the research and writing the nonfiction true stories.
Mhm.
But then I love making stuff up too. And just getting people thinking and wondering about the universe.
Oh, yeah, and scaring them too with your horror.
Well, scaring them is always fun.
That's awesome. I love it. Yeah. Have you ever thought about doing a screenplay?
Um, yeah, I have actually. I There was one of my stories that a couple times people have tried to turn into screenplays.
Hmm.
I don't think I would be that good at a screenplay. I would rather have something that I've written, have somebody who's good at screenplays do that version of it. But
Hmm.
I don't because I do the written word. I think a screenplay is probably better served by somebody whose skills are more adept to that. I mean, that's a different
Hmm.
medium when you think about it.
Oh, it is. It's definitely a different medium. And I bet you were inspired by the Twilight Zone a little bit, huh?
Yeah, a lot of my fiction, I call it horror because it's not science, is
Mhm.
science fiction. And when you think of fantasy, you're thinking of sorcerers and magic and things like that. So the reason I call my stuff horror is because it's the only one that kind of fits the style of writing I do. And
Mhm.
the writing I do is really Twilight Zone-ish stories that something weird happens. It's not necessarily a science fiction
Mhm.
thing, and it's not necessarily fantasy. It's sometimes paranormal or unexplainable.
Mhm.
And it was easier when I wanted to attribute a genre. So I just say, yeah, I write horror.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Although most people think, oh, that means I write a guy in a hockey mask runs around and stabs people. Well, that's not
Right.
horror. That's slasher fiction.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it doesn't work for me. Oh, no.
No,
I'm
I
just
don't like
kidding.
those. I don't like those movies either.
Yeah, I like science fiction though. I'm really, really big on science fiction
Well,
too.
science fiction really is a mirror held up to reality, right?
Hmm.
Science fiction really tells us about ourselves when you look at it.
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt. And I know there's a little bit of talk about the Ramsey Lake. So what's the story around that?
Uh, so Ramsey Lake is the world's largest freshwater lake within a downtown core in Sudbury,
Hmm.
and so it's in the center of the city. There's a giant lake that is such a large, vast space that there have actually been a lot of UFO sightings over
Hmm.
that lake. There was even, and I didn't end up including it. I'd found some sort of speculation that there's certain deep parts of the lake that there's the possibility that some other creature lives in it, but I didn't find enough. Um, I didn't find more than one story for it, so I didn't feel it was worth putting into the book. I try to approach the book with an open mind,
Hmm.
and I like sharing the stories that make you wonder what if. And if I find that there's an element that sort of disproves that it could actually be a ghost, I'll put that there too. Because depending on how the reader wants to approach it, if they want to approach it and believe, I want to allow them to have that experience. But if they approach it with a skeptical viewpoint, I want to allow them to enjoy that as well. I want them to sort of um, go whatever way. And it was kind of funny because it happened in Haunted Hamilton. If I can digress,
Mm-hmm.
there was a haunted house in Hamilton, not far from the neighborhood I was living in when I wrote it, that it was called the Murder Mansion. And there was a story about this man who, in the middle of the night, walked around the house, murdered his family in their sleep with a hatchet, and then went up to the third floor to the Widow's Walk and hung himself.
Mm.
And then the next family that moved in, the teenage son, did the exact same thing, allegedly, as the story goes, with the very same axe, and he murdered his family and hung himself. And so when I was writing that chapter, there were some other stories about that house. And that house is a house that was in the neighborhood my wife grew up in.
Mm.
And she remembers there's been stories about that house when she was young. So I had to do a chapter about the murder mansion. But when I started to do the research, and I contacted the police to see, well, okay, if there were murders in this neighborhood in this time period, there would probably be some sort of police report about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't find any evidence that there had ever been any sort of murders, never mind, two multiple axe murders. Of course, it couldn't be the same axe because unless the axe disappeared and came back again, the police would have it. They would have it in their custody room. And so when I wrote the chapter, I explained, well, when I spoke to the police, I couldn't find any evidence of there actually being murders there. But I sort of ended the chapter saying, but isn't it an interesting story? And the editor got mad at me and he says, well, you can't put that in there. I said, well, why not? I said, it's research I found out about. I can't withhold it. I have to share it. He goes, yeah, but you're gonna take away the suspension of disbelief. And I said, yeah, I know. But then if I don't share this and then somebody else goes and looks into it, they're going to realize that I'm just trying to pull one over on them. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of had a debate back and forth about it. And so he let me put in not the details of contacting the police and what I found out, but just basically saying, I was unable to find any substantiated evidence that this had ever happened. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we finally met halfway. But that was sort of an illustration that I want to tell fun ghost stories. Murder's not fun, but I want to tell stories that make you think and make you wonder and make you go, ooh, that just gave me a chill. Right. But I don't want to do it in such a way that, if I know that something may have actually been a tall tale that was made up, I don't want to try and present that as if it's real.
Right. I agree.
So that was sort of an interesting, I think almost like a philosophical thing that I decided to approach it with an open mind and to listen to the stories. But if I found conflicting evidence or conflicting eyewitness reports, I would report both sides.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And you're really good at telling stories, by the way. You get into that nice tone where you just like
well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I know everybody wants to hover around the radio, right? The internet.
We're around the virtual campfire right now, aren't we?
I'm telling you, wouldn't that be fun? In the old days, that was what people used to do. I mean, they'd go camping and toast marshmallows and talk about ghost stories.
Some of my favorite times when I was a Cub Scout were staying up all night and sitting around the campfire and just sharing spooky stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can remember that when I was a kid too, and I came from a big family. But yeah, we always had something to talk about, without a doubt. That's kind of funny. Yeah, it seems to me like, well, there's a lot of activity over there with UFOs, and we talked about the UFOs, but we talk about some of the attractions. Now, you think it's all the mines, or is there something else going on over there?
Well, I mean, the mines could be an important reason why people were attracted to, or why extraterrestrial life would be attracted to that particular area of the planet. Mm-hmm. Well, the mines. The reason the mines are there are the high nickel content in the ground. I mean, the other thing too is, what is a mine? When you look at what a mine is going and digging and reaching and pulling a natural resource and converting it. Eventually, it's converted to another type of energy. What a powerful thing. When energy is converted, we talked about hospitals where people die and are born. That's where energy is converted from one to another. And a mine, in many ways, is a natural resource that's being extracted and pulled.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about people being channels and extracting psychic elements and fine tuning them in a certain area. So, how could a mine not be a central repository for these powerful forces to attract other things to it?
Right. Yeah, that makes
That's
sense. And also, Ontario is the real hotspot, though. I mean, it's in the whole area of Ontario. Is that correct?
um, I think, yeah, there's certain areas. I mean, I haven't done a lot of research of other areas of Ontario
Mm-hmm.
for UFO activities, but I'm pretty sure, just based on the research that I did, Sudbury seems to have a per capita like a higher incident. Like I said, when I was looking at the newspaper articles, there were some days where every single day there was another report of a UFO.
Mm. Yeah.
Uh, and I was thinking for, when you think about the population of Sudbury, so, when I was growing up, the population of Sudbury was what, 90,000 people?
Wow.
And the population of Toronto is like, I don't know how many million. And you think so the per capita, the number of people who are likely to see something is probably greater in an area like Toronto, and yet there are more reports in a smaller town like Sudbury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. And also, magnetic north is pretty close to you, isn't it?
Feels like it, yeah.
Isn't it like around Thunder Bay? It used to be. I can't
A
remember.
little bit north of that, yeah. So not all that far away
I was
from where
wondering if that had anything to do with the activity. Just a
could have
thought.
something to do with too. I mean, you think about. I mean, have you ever seen the Northern Lights? Have you been north enough to actually
No,
see
I
them?
haven't, and I really do want to see them before I
It
leave
is
this planet.
such. Honestly, it is such a phenomenal thing to see, and I mean, it is mystical and magical,
Mm,
and it's a reflection of those forces.
right.
And reflection off the ice and the whole bit. But you look at something like that and you wonder, is there something like the Northern Lights, but we don't see them, that are
Mm,
being, from the skies to the ground? Is there some sort of energy pulsating between the two of them? And that's the kind of thing that I visualize when I think about, magnetic north, and I think about Sudbury,
mm-hmm.
and what could potentially draw extraterrestrial life to be attracted to this area,
Right.
is that there's this pulsing. It's like when you're in a plane and you fly over a city and there's these bright lights that you see, caused by a light. Well, there's maybe elements in the ground that are visible in a different spectrum.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you. That's well said. Yeah, very much so. And it seems to me like Canadians are extra polite, so I'll give you 5 stars for that.
Oh, thank you very much.
Why is that? I don't know. Americans are more rowdy, I guess, huh?
It's just a wonderful stereotype that kind of holds true. That whole politeness thing. It's a fun one we get to play off of, isn't it?
It is. My goodness. Yeah, you guys are pretty peaceful, I would say, except for your hockey team, right?
Except for the hockey team, that's
Yeah,
it,
there you
of
go.
course. Yeah,
That's just cute.
don't get us going on hockey. And we have Toronto has been known for a bizarre mayor too.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It's not my mayor. My mayor knows how to read and he loves books.
There you go. I resonate with that for sure. Yeah, intellectuals are good.
Yeah, yeah, that works. Yeah,
Yep.
no, I mean Hamilton has a great mayor who's a musician, and he reads books, and and
Nice.
then I look at Toronto and I go, well, this is just a farce.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I guess it's everywhere. I mean, America has some issues too.
Yeah, there's some politicians in the U.S. that have done similar crazy things
Oh,
I've read
goodness.
about.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, without a doubt. But I'm certainly glad you joined us tonight. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I hope to have you back. We're getting ready to wrap this up soon, but not yet. But I was wondering if you noticed a correlation between sacred ceremonial areas and ghostly activity.
Probably. I'm trying to think of some specific ones that were drawn. I mean, there's a couple of stories about graveyards,
Mm-hmm.
and because when you think about graves, there's ceremonies associated with burying,
Right.
the ritual of burying, and there was one story from the haunted Hamilton with the Burkholder Cemetery, and one of the stories was that when in the village when somebody died, lights were seen heading towards the cemetery, almost as if the spirit knew that that's where the body was going to rest,
Hmm.
and was going there sort of as a foreshadowing, but there was an interesting tale that's associated with a ritual that's going to be happening. Somebody died. There's going to be a ritual that takes place in this area,
Mm-hmm.
and was that an evidence that the spirit was on its way there because it knew what was coming?
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah, it makes sense to me. You set the intent, you put the energy in motion, and spirits do know. I mean, even when people are getting ready to transfer out, I don't know if you've heard stories where the ancestors or the relatives will show up, and when they're ready to go, and they'll greet them before they actually depart.
yeah, and that's always a very touching thing
Mm-hmm.
because you realize like you're moving on to another realm, and you're not alone, and they're
Exactly.
there. I mean that's one of the things that gives us comfort
Mm-hmm.
when we think about the fact that um, you're not, you're leaving and going on this journey, but there's people here to guide you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something, and that's why, like, ghost stories can be spooky, and ghost stories can be eerie, and they can be intriguing, but there's also this element of just this passion and this love uh, that I find really, really fascinating. And some of the ghost stories can be just as touching as they are creepy,
Mm-hmm.
um, or
Yeah.
even humorous.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I was
What?
going to share.
Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
There's the Dundas District Elementary School here in Hamilton, where there's a practical joker ghost,
Hmm.
and there's a group of custodians who had a pact. They were debating. They were telling ghost stories, and they had decided to have a pact and say one of them, whoever dies first, will come back and haunt the other ones to prove that there's life after death. And the reason they were talking about this was because not just behind the school there was a railroad, and in December 1934, on December 26th, so the day after Christmas, there was a major train accident, and the basement of the school was supposedly used as a morgue. Therefore, there were stories about weird things that were happening and things that were seen and heard from the basement of the school. And so that's why the custodians were talking about, do ghosts exist? And so that's when they decided, okay, yeah, as soon as one of us dies, we will, the first one to come back will haunt the rest of us. And so, Russell was the custodian who used to play practical jokes on his colleagues. And he used to do a really fun thing where he would call in a female voice, "Help, help, help, I've fallen down the stairs," or whatever the case may be, and his colleagues would rush over, and it would just be him standing there laughing. So of course Russell was the first to die. And after he died, things like that continued to happen. There would be calls of help from different areas, and that was so
Hmm.
they believed that it was Russell playing these tricks on them. Other things that had happened, which is interesting, is not these custodians, but pardon me, ones who had worked there a decade or two later, uh, would hear weird things. One of them was on the ladder doing something, and the other custodian was supposedly, they thought they heard them walk by with their keys
Hmm.
down the hallway right beside the door they were in. And then, a minute later, they saw across the hall that the custodian that they thought was just behind them, that they heard walking behind them, was actually on the far side of the room, standing there looking at them. And so you're like, okay, so who was that then with the keys?
Hmm.
And another time when they had finished, they were just starting to mop the floor on a certain level, and then it was lunchtime, so they went down to have lunch, and when they came back up, the entire floor was already mopped.
Wow.
And it was kind of like, so Russell was playing tricks on them even after he had died. So it was almost like, it was kind of eerie, but it was also funny to see that he sort of continued to do the things in the spirit that he did them when he was alive.
Hmm. That's really interesting. And you hear the stories of lights going on and off, and I've actually witnessed things like that where a departed relative or someone transfers out, and then all of a sudden the lights go on and off, and and then of course telephones. I've heard the story of telephones ringing, supposedly with the departed that contact the living. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of that, but I haven't. No, I mean, I haven't reported on any for any of my books. But that's I always find it fascinating. That a spirit's going to use a technology that we're familiar with in
Hmm.
order to communicate with us. I always found that fascinating. That they're
Yeah,
channeling it through a machine.
right. And it's always electrical too when you think about it.
Well, I mean, we know our brains are fired upon electrical impulses, so why
Mhm.
wouldn't there be some sort of impulses for the spirit world?
Exactly. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's really fascinating when you think about it. I'm so glad you're writing these books. It's a really, really good read. And yeah, it really moves the mind into another area. I really enjoy it. So, and once again, if people want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
You can find me www.markleslie.ca. On Twitter, I'm at Mark Leslie. Mark at markleslie.ca is my email. If you Google me, I'm sure you'll find me all over the place.
Oh,
You'll
you are.
find my stories and my books all over the place.
Exactly.
And I love to hear from readers. If you have a haunted bookstore or library story to share with me, please send it to me. I still have 10 days to get this latest book into to Dundurn, it's funny. I was just talking to someone today, and they shared a story, and I went, "Oh, good, I can sneak that into chapter 4, where
Sweet.
we're talking about that already."
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'll be looking forward to reading that. Let us know when it's live.
I will. I will. It's coming out in the fall this year, so got to get that book finished.
Oh, excellent. Well, you want to come back? Let me know. I'll put you back
No,
on here.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Oh, likewise. Yeah, I enjoy talking to you for sure. I could talk to you for hours about these ghosts and spirits, and yeah. And have you ever had any encounters with animal spirits?
No, I've had some weird encounters with animals behaving funny, as if they were in contact with spirits.
Hmm.
That eerie impression where the cat gets up and starts raising, its fur and its back and it's arching at something that's not there,
Mm-hmm.
which has always freaked me out, or a dog reacting to something that's just not there.
Right.
But I've never. Oh, I mean, there is a story about a haunted cat at the Armories in Hamilton, and his actual bones are actually on display, which is kind of a weird
Hmm.
thing in a case. But there's a ghost of the cat. Oh, and there's a haunted bar in Hamilton
Hmm.
that when you're sitting at a certain bar stool, occasionally you'll feel the cat rub up against your legs, and you look down and there's nothing there. And
Wow.
that used to be the cat that was at the bar. So yeah, a couple of my favorite things are bookstores and bars. But
A book and a beer, right?
yeah, it's all good.
That's funny. That's really, really interesting. You know, where I live out here, I live in a place that predates the 1800s. It's a really old carriage house, converted. But this definitely has a history to it. And I have heard, I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, and you probably are, but when I first moved in here, I actually heard footsteps upstairs
Oh,
at night,
really?
and I actually had my dog and my cat down here with me, and I was like, I thought it was my cat at first because I heard this pitter patter, but it was a heavier kind of pitter patter coming down the steps, and it wasn't my cat. So it's very, very interesting. But yeah, there are things that do happen, and I was wondering if you had people mention things like that.
Well, I mean that's a common one where the footsteps. So you think was it a footstep that sounded more like an animal?
Well, it's funny because at first upstairs it sounded like a person, and then when it went around the stairs, because I have a spiral staircase, it sounded like my cat, and I thought it was my cat coming down the stairs, but my cat is a heavy walker. So it was really strange, and I was like, and then I look over, my cat's at the end of my bed. I'm like, oh, okay.
You're going, all right. So what's making that noise?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
that's kind of an eerie one.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, we've had some anomalies out here, and like I said, it's an old area. And of course, back then, well, I'm sure you have it in Canada, where they used to bury their dead on the property,
hmm
in the
hmm
old lands. So, I mean, I haven't come across any corpses or anything like that, but it's kind of interesting when you think about it because everything is a big cemetery.
Yeah, that's true. It was true because you were buried on your own property, and then later on that it was kind of like the Tombstone
Hmm.
ghost story, where there's something on that land that we didn't realize that is still there, and it's still affecting us. It's still touching us where we stand today.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. Yeah, for sure. And once again, I'd like you to cover your book you're currently working on.
Yeah, sure. So, Tomes of Terror,
Love it.
haunted bookstores and libraries, and I mean, you can tell I'm going for alliteration in the title, so that it's sort of part of the brand. Um, but bookstores and libraries and books have been a huge passion of mine, as has sharing spooky stories.
Hmm.
So the thought of writing a book that, and this is global, whereas Haunted Hamilton's about one city and Spooky Sotheby's about one city, Tomes of Terror is Canada, the US, the UK, Ireland, Australia, Mexico. I mean, there's ghost stories about bookstores and libraries from around the world, and it's fascinating the types of ghosts that exist in the different areas. I mean, one of them is Jack Kerouac's ghost in Haslam's bookstore in Florida.
Hmm.
And Jack Kerouac used to be a challenging customer who would come in, being one of those annoying authors who would come and take his books and place them on the top shelf where everyone could see it. And so after he died, there was his books got shuffled around the store on their own, and so the belief was that he's back in the store doing the things that the manager used to hate that he did in real life.
Oh, how funny. It's
Uh,
interesting how so many areas, libraries, you'd think that they wouldn't haunt those locations, but I guess they do, huh?
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. There's so many libraries where there's this one, and I'm trying to remember because I'm writing so many of them at the same time. But you would walk into this room and you would see a woman sitting in a chair in the dark reading. They turn on the light, she'd look up at you, and then she'd disappear, and you go, "Okay, that's kind of interesting." But
Wow.
it was, that was the original librarian. That's her ghost.
That reminds me of Ghostbusters or something. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, that's that scene from Ghostbusters. And there's a
Yeah,
lot of evidence of different bookstores where books get piled up in the middle of the room like that. And they come in the morning and there's yet another pile of books.
really, like a poltergeist almost.
Yeah, like that. And there's actually at least three different bookstores that I've written about for this book already where, the books are found piled,
Wow.
which is like, what are they doing?
Very, very
You
interesting.
don't even have to wait for the customers to come and ruin the displays. The ghosts are doing it for you.
Exactly. Well, Mark, we're getting ready to wrap this up here, but I just want to thank you again for being on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and I look forward to having you back on. And thank you for staying up this late hour to be with us. I so
Thanks,
appreciate
Larissa. It
it.
was great chatting with you.
Oh, my pleasure. And tune in, everybody, next week. My special guest will be John Storm. And, of course, stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dunger and Mickey coming up next to sell you on into the night from Down Under. And we have maybe a minute or two left. But any final words? Anything you wanted to mention real quick?
No, I just think I hope everyone had a good time with the stories tonight, and just be careful what might be looking over your shoulder.
And pleasant dreams, right?
And pleasant dreams.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening, everyone. Have a great week. See you next week. Thank you again, Mark.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.